Lara has always lived a good life, a stable marriage, a career, and the respect of her friends. But when a man from her past, her husband's younger brother, returns to her life, everything begins to come apart at the seams. Gabriel has grown up, matured, and now he is not just a relative, but a forbidden fruit to which she is uncontrollably drawn. She fights with herself, ignores the hints, looks away. But the desire is stronger. They both know it. They are drawn to each other like a magnet. Their meetings are casual, but their glances are lingering, filled with everything that cannot be voiced. Will she be able to resist the temptation? Or will she plunge into the sin, betraying everything she believed in? The night started like any other: laughter, dinner, stolen glances across the table. But when he stepped away, leaving us alone for just a moment, everything changed. His brother's touch sent a shiver down my spine, the unspoken tension finally breaking free. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should stop. But when desire takes over, reason disappears. And then, the door creaked open. What happened next shattered everything. Would you have resisted or given in? Don't miss this shocking confession. Watch till the end. The night started like any other: laughter, dinner, stolen glances across the table. But when he stepped away, leaving us alone for just a moment, everything changed. His brother's touch sent a shiver down my spine, the unspoken tension finally breaking free. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should stop. But when desire takes over, reason disappears. And then, the door creaked open. What happened next shattered everything. Would you have resisted or given in? Don't miss this shocking confession. Watch till the end. The night he arrived, the air felt different. The moment I opened the door and saw him standing there, a suitcase slung over his shoulder, I knew. Something shifted inside me. Something I didn't want to name. "Hey, Lara," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. He wasn't a boy anymore. "Gabe," I managed, swallowing hard. It's been a while. It had been 6 years since I last saw Gabriel, my husband's younger brother. The last time, he had been just a lanky college student, all restless energy and careless smiles. Now, standing before me, he was something else entirely. He had filled out, his frame taller, stronger. His jawline was sharper, his presence heavier. Mark appeared behind me, clapping a hand on his brother's back. "Finally decided to come home, huh?" he said, grinning. "It's good to have you here, man." Gabriel smiled, but his eyes never left mine. A second too long. It was nothing, and yet, it was everything. That first evening was filled with polite conversation, laughter, and glasses of wine. Mark was thrilled to have Gabe back, talking about childhood memories and future plans. I forced myself to focus, to play my role, the perfect wife, the attentive hostess. But every time Gabriel spoke, my pulse quickened. Every time he looked at me, something inside me tightened. "You're quiet," he noted at one point, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I glanced at him, meeting his gaze for just a moment too long. "Just tired," I lied. He smirked, as if he knew the truth. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, my body stiff with thoughts I shouldn't be thinking, I heard footsteps in the hallway. The faint creak of the wooden floorboards. Gabriel, moving through the house, his presence weaving through the walls, through my mind. I closed my eyes and turned away from the door. But the damage was already done. The past had returned. And it wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, the air in the house was thick, charged with something I refused to name. The scent of coffee filled the kitchen as I moved mechanically, pouring Mark a cup, then myself. Gabriel was already there, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He was watching me. Again. "Morning," he said, his voice husky, still rough from sleep. I nodded, focusing on my coffee. "Sleep well?" "Not really," he admitted, sipping from his mug. "New place. New sounds. Takes a while to adjust." I knew that wasn't why. Mark walked in, breaking the moment, oblivious to the invisible string pulling tight between me and the man standing across the kitchen. He kissed my cheek before sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone. "Babe, can you make me some eggs?" Before I could answer, Gabriel's voice cut through the space. "I got it." I looked up, startled. Mark barely reacted, just shrugged. "Thanks, man." Gabriel moved past me, reaching for a pan. Too close. I caught his scent, clean, warm, masculine. A sharp inhale, and I stepped back, gripping my coffee mug as if it could anchor me. Mark kept talking, lost in some work emails, completely unaware. But I felt it. The awareness. The way Gabriel's fingers brushed mine when he handed me a plate. The way his gaze lingered. The way my body responded to it. I had to get out of this house. That afternoon, I went for a walk, needing space, air, anything to clear my head. The ocean was only a few blocks away, waves crashing against the shore in rhythmic certainty. I barely noticed the footsteps behind me until he spoke. "You always walk alone?" I turned to find Gabriel there, hands in his pockets, his eyes unreadable. "Sometimes," I said, my voice too soft. He studied me, then nodded toward the sand. "Mind some company?" I should have said no. I should have turned around and walked back home. Instead, I nodded. We walked in silence for a while, the waves our only soundtrack. I could feel him beside me, the heat of his body so close, too close. "You happy?" he asked suddenly. I stopped. My heart did too. "What?" He turned toward me then, his gaze pinning me in place. "You heard me." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Gabriel took a step closer, his voice quieter now. "You don't have to lie to me, Laura." I hated how much he could still see through me. I hated that, for the first time in years, I wanted someone to. The wind blew between us, but neither of us moved. And in that charged, dangerous moment, I knew this was only the beginning. I should have walked away. I should have turned and left him standing there on the beach, let the wind carry away the weight of his question. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, caught between the waves and the man who wasn't mine to want. "You didn't answer," Gabriel said, his voice low, steady. I swallowed hard. "Because it's none of your business." His lips twitched, like he almost smiled. "That's an answer, though, isn't it?" I exhaled, turning my gaze to the horizon. "You don't know anything about my life, Gabriel." "Maybe not," he admitted, taking a step closer. "But I know what someone looks like when they're starving." His words hit me like a fist to the ribs. I turned to him, a sharp retort ready, but it died on my tongue. He was watching me with something raw in his gaze, something that made my stomach tighten. I was supposed to be furious, but I wasn't. I was afraid, because he was right. And worse, I wanted him to see it. The silence between us stretched, thick with everything unspoken. I needed to break it before I did something reckless. Before I let myself drown in the way he was looking at me. "I should go," I muttered, stepping back. But Gabriel wasn't finished. "Come with me," he said. My breath caught. "What?" He glanced toward the pier where the boats rocked against the docks. "Just for a ride. Fresh air. No questions, no pressure." I hesitated. I should have said no. I should have reminded myself of the ring on my finger, of the life I had built with Mark, predictable and safe. But Gabriel was standing there, waiting, his dark eyes full of something dangerous and irresistible. And I was so tired of pretending. "Okay," I whispered. A slow smirk crossed his lips. "Good." Minutes later, we were on his motorcycle, the roar of the engine vibrating beneath me as I gripped his waist. The wind lashed against my skin as the city blurred past, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it, freedom. Gabriel rode fast, reckless, weaving through traffic with a confidence that sent a thrill through me. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was exactly what I needed. When we finally stopped, we were on the outskirts of town, near an abandoned cliffside road overlooking the sea. The sky had deepened to burnt orange, the water below shimmering in the fading light. I climbed off the bike, breathless, heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with speed. Gabriel leaned against the handlebars, watching me. "Feel better?" I nodded, unable to find the words. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was so gentle, so deliberate, that I shivered. "You miss this, don't you?" he murmured. Feeling alive. I closed my eyes, swallowing against the ache in my throat. "Laura," he said softly. I looked up. And then it happened. He leaned in, slow, giving me time to stop him. I didn't. Our lips met in the dying light of the sun, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty. I felt everything. The moment our lips met, the world tilted. There was no hesitation, no space for second thoughts, only the warmth of Gabriel's mouth against mine, the slow press of his lips, the unspoken invitation in every breath between us. My fingers curled against his jacket, holding on to him like an anchor, because I was drowning. The wind howled around us, the scent of salt and gasoline thick in the air, but all I could focus on was him. The way his hand moved to the small of my back, pulling me closer. The way his other hand cupped my face, rough fingertips brushing over my jaw, holding me in place like I was something fragile. But I wasn't. I was breaking. I was unraveling in his hands. And I wanted more. A shudder ran through me as his thumb traced over my cheek, the warmth of his body bleeding into mine. The cliffside was empty, the last light of the sun bleeding into the ocean, and in that moment, I wasn't someone's wife. I wasn't the woman waiting at home for a husband who had long since stopped looking at her the way Gabriel was looking at me now. I was just me. I pulled back first, my breath shaky, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest. Gabriel didn't let go. His forehead rested against mine, his breathing just as unsteady. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice low and raw. I opened my mouth, ready to say it, ready to put an end to this before it spiraled into something I couldn't control. But I couldn't. I didn't want him to stop. My silence was its own confession. Gabriel exhaled, his thumb still stroking my cheek, and when he kissed me again, there was no more hesitation. This time, it was hunger. We didn't speak on the ride back. The silence between us was thick, stretched tight with everything unspoken. My hands gripped his waist, my forehead resting against his back, and with every turn of the road, I felt myself slipping further from the person I had been when the day started. By the time we reached town, it was dark. The streetlights flickered as we pulled up in front of my house, where my husband was waiting. Reality hit me like a slap. I let go of Gabriel as if I had been burned, my pulse thrumming with guilt and something far more dangerous, desire. "Laura," Gabriel said, his voice softer now. I shook my head. This was a mistake. His expression didn't change. He just watched me, eyes unreadable. Was it? I swallowed, fingers tightening into fists. It can't happen again. Gabriel leaned forward, resting his arms on the handlebars of his bike. Then why do you look like you're already waiting for the next time? I turned away before he could see the truth written all over my face. I stepped onto the sidewalk, my legs shaky, my body still humming with the feeling of his hands on me. I reached for my keys, my breath uneven, my thoughts a mess. And then I saw it. The living room light was on. Mark was awake. Waiting. A sharp pang of guilt twisted in my gut. I hesitated, looking over my shoulder, but Gabriel was already gone. The sound of his motorcycle faded into the night, leaving me alone with the choices I had made. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, and walked inside. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it, the weight of everything I had done pressing down on me like a vice. Mark was sitting on the couch, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table beside him. The TV was on, muted, casting flickering light across his face. He wasn't watching it. He was waiting for me. "You're late," he said, his voice unreadable. I forced a small smile, slipping off my jacket. I lost track of time. Went for a ride. Mark's eyes flickered to the keys in my hand, his gaze sharp. Alone. A pause. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough. I hesitated for half a second too long, and Mark caught it. His jaw tightened. "Who were you with, Lara?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "Just an old friend." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Mark studied me for a moment, his knuckles tightening around the glass. He didn't push, didn't demand answers, but his silence spoke volumes. "Well," he finally said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "I hope whoever it was made the evening worth it." I didn't answer. I walked past him, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and made my way upstairs. My hands shook as I closed the bedroom door behind me, my reflection in the mirror almost unrecognizable. The worst part? I wasn't ashamed of what I had done. I was terrified of how much I wanted to do it again. Days passed, but the fire didn't fade. It grew. It twisted itself around me, creeping into the quiet moments, the way I caught myself staring at my phone, hoping for a message. The way my pulse quickened whenever I heard the distant roar of a motorcycle. The way my body betrayed me, remembering the feel of Gabriel's hands, his mouth, his breath against my skin. I avoided him. Or, at least, I tried. But fate had other plans. The grocery store was nearly empty when I ran into him. Literally. I turned a corner too quickly, colliding with someone solid, the impact sending my basket crashing to the floor. I looked up, already apologizing, and froze. Gabriel. His hands were on my arms, steadying me. His touch was light, but it burned through me like fire. "Lara," he murmured. I couldn't breathe. His eyes were darker than I remembered, filled with something I couldn't name. Something dangerous. Something thrilling. "You've been avoiding me," he said. I forced a laugh, stepping back quickly. "I've been busy." A smirk. Liar. Heat crawled up my neck. I bent down, grabbing the fallen items from my basket, desperate for something, anything, to break the tension. But Gabriel crouched down too, his fingers brushing mine as he picked up an apple. I sucked in a sharp breath. "You keep running," he said, his voice lower now. "But we both know it's not going to work." I clenched my jaw. "Gabriel." "You think about it, don't you?" he interrupted, holding my gaze. "About that night? About me?" I should have walked away. I should have laughed, shaken my head, left him standing there. But I didn't. Because he was right. I thought about it every second of every day. And he knew it. Gabriel leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Say the word, Lara. Say stop, and I'll walk away." I opened my mouth. No sound came out. His smirk widened, just slightly, and he leaned back. "That's what I thought," he murmured. And then he was gone. I stood there, heart racing, my body betraying me once again. I was playing with fire. And I was going to burn. What would you do in Lara's place? Would you walk away, or would you give in? Let me know in the comments. Your thoughts might be the next inspiration for our story. And don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, the best and the worst is yet to come. I barely made it through the rest of the day. My hands trembled as I stacked groceries onto the kitchen counter, my mind stuck in a loop, replaying every word Gabriel had said. Every glance. Every touch. Mark sat at the dining table, flipping through emails on his tablet. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Long line at the store?" he asked absently. I hesitated. The weight of my lie sat heavy on my tongue. "Yeah," I said quietly. He nodded, already lost in his work again. I should have been relieved. But the fact that he didn't press, didn't notice the way my pulse was racing, the way I could barely breathe, made something inside me crack. I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter, staring blankly at the white marble. Gabriel was right. I was running. But not from him. I was running from the truth. The next evening, I found myself back at the old roadside bar. I told myself I wasn't going to see him. I lied. The moment I stepped inside, my heart slammed against my ribs. He was there, sitting at the far end of the bar, his fingers lazily tracing patterns along the rim of a whiskey glass. As if he felt me, his head turned. And he smiled. God, that smile. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked straight back out that door. But I didn't. Instead, I walked straight to him, my body moving before my mind could stop it. Running didn't work, did it? Gabriel murmured, his voice like smoke curling around my senses. I exhaled sharply, my fingers curling into my palms. Don't flatter yourself. A chuckle. Laura, we're past pretending, don't you think? His eyes dipped lower, slow, deliberate. I felt it everywhere. Sit, he said, patting the stool beside him. I hesitated for half a second too long. That was all he needed. He reached for my wrist, his fingers just barely grazing my skin. But the effect was electric. I sat. The drinks blurred together. Not from the alcohol, but from him. From the way he leaned in closer, his lips brushing the shell of my ear as he spoke. From the way his fingers trailed lightly over my wrist, my palm, setting fire to every nerve in my body. From the way my breathing hitched every time he so much as looked at me. I was losing control. And I didn't want it back. You keep fighting this, Gabriel murmured, his hand ghosting over my knee beneath the table. Why? I swallowed hard. Because I know where it leads. His gaze darkened. And where does it lead? I lifted my eyes to his, my breath shuddering out of me. Somewhere we can't come back from, I whispered. Gabriel exhaled slowly, watching me. Then, deliberately, he reached for my hand. My pulse roared in my ears. He didn't pull. Didn't force. He just waited. I had a choice. I could leave. I could still walk away, go home, pretend none of this had ever happened. Or I could step off the edge of the cliff and free fall. My fingers twitched against his. His eyes burned into me. I made my choice. I intertwined my fingers with his. And just like that, there was no turning back. The moment my fingers intertwined with his, the world tilted. The sounds of the bar, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the distant hum of an old jukebox, faded into white noise. Gabriel's thumb brushed over my knuckles, slow, deliberate. His grip was firm, but not possessive. A silent question. A final chance to pull away. I didn't. My pulse roared in my ears as he leaned in, his lips just inches from mine. Laura, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. You can still walk away. No, I couldn't. Not anymore. I knew it. And so did he. The next thing I knew, we were outside. The air was cool, thick with the scent of rain on the pavement. Gabriel's hand was still wrapped around mine, grounding me in a moment that felt completely untethered from reality. Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Somewhere quieter. I should have questioned it. But I didn't. He led me to his car, a sleek black machine that matched the danger in his eyes. He opened the passenger door, waiting. I hesitated. Not because I wanted to stop, but because I knew the second I got in, there would be no more pretending. No more lines to blur. No more lies to tell myself. I got in. His apartment was exactly what I expected, minimal, modern, dark. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline, but I barely noticed. Gabriel stood in the doorway, watching me. Waiting. Every muscle in my body was wound so tight I thought I might shatter if he touched me. And then he did. He stepped closer, his hands skimming my arms, his fingers trailing up to cup my jaw. His touch was slow, reverent, as if memorizing the shape of me. I shivered. I should go, I whispered, but even I didn't believe it. Gabriel exhaled a quiet laugh. No, you shouldn't. My breath hitched. You wanted this, he murmured, his lips ghosting over my cheek, my jaw. Say it. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the front of his shirt as if that could steady me. "I wanted this," I admitted. "I want you." His lips finally met mine, and just like that, the last of my restraint snapped. I didn't remember how we ended up tangled together on his bed. Only the feeling of him. The heat. The way every touch unraveled me, piece by piece. The way he looked at me, not like I was someone's wife, but like I was his. And maybe, for that moment, I was. I woke up to the sound of rain against the window. The city lights flickered outside, casting shadows across the room. Gabriel was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, his back to me. For a moment, I just watched him. Watched the slow rise and fall of his shoulders. The tension in his spine. Regret clawed at my throat, but it wasn't regret for what we had done. It was regret for the world waiting outside this room. For the consequences that were coming. Gabriel turned his head slightly, as if sensing my thoughts. His gaze met mine, unreadable. "You're thinking too much," he murmured. I let out a shaky breath. "I don't know how to stop." He shifted, reaching out to run his fingers through my hair, his touch softer now. "Then don't." I closed my eyes, leaning into him. If this was the last moment we had, I wanted to hold on to it. Because soon, the real world would come crashing back in. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The air was thick, almost suffocating, charged with something unspoken yet undeniable. The dim light cast shifting shadows across the room, making everything feel dreamlike, suspended in time, as if the world outside no longer existed. Their breaths were uneven, the space between them shrinking to something dangerously close, something that neither of them could justify yet neither could resist. A trembling hand reached out, not quite touching, just hovering, hesitant yet desperate. There was still time to stop this, to step back before the point of no return. But neither of them moved away. Her pulse hammered in her throat, a mix of fear, guilt, and something deeper, something raw and primal, something she had never allowed herself to acknowledge before. "Tell me to go," he whispered, his voice rough, thick with restraint. She should have. Every fiber of her being told her to say the words, to break the spell before it consumed them both. But her lips parted and no sound came. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. His fingers finally closed the distance, tracing a path along her skin, slow, deliberate, feather-light yet leaving trails of fire in their wake. Her breath hitched. This was wrong. This was inevitable. And as the walls of reality began to crumble around them, all that remained was the unbearable weight of desire and the terrifying thrill of crossing a line they could never uncross. But even in the haze of it all, a lingering thought remained. How long before everything came crashing down? The moment shattered like glass. A sound, small, insignificant on its own, became deafening in the silence between them. The creak of a floorboard. The shift of air as a door moved ever so slightly. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. His touch, once searing against her skin, now felt like a brand, a burning mark of guilt spreading across her body. Someone was there. The realization hit harder than a scream. She turned sharply, eyes wide, pulse hammering so loud she could hear it in her ears. Shadows flickered at the doorway, shifting, lingering, watching. No. No, no, no. For a split second, she thought she could undo it, take it all back, erase what had just happened, pretend it was a fever dream, a fleeting moment of weakness. But the truth was already out, hanging thick in the air like smoke from a fire that had burned too long. His body tensed beside her. He had heard it too. He knew. And then, the voice. Low, unsteady, strained with disbelief. What the hell is this? Everything inside her turned to ice. She forced herself to look, forced herself to face the consequences she had spent so long pretending wouldn't come. And there he was, standing in the doorway, eyes wide, face pale. He had seen. He knew. and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence was suffocating. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she say? What could possibly undo what had already been seen, already been felt? His breathing was uneven, heavy, his fists clenched at his sides. The look in his eyes was worse than rage, worse than fury. It was betrayal, disbelief. The weight of it crushed her. "I..." Her voice cracked. The word barely made it past her lips. "Don't." The single word cut through her like a blade. "Frame. You'll regret this," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Not because of me, but because of what comes next." And with that, he was gone. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed in the stillness. She stood there, frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. What had he meant? What was coming next? And why, despite everything, did she suddenly feel like the real nightmare was only just beginning? If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of this journey. But tell me, do you want to know what happens next? Should this story continue, unraveling the consequences of the choices made, the secrets left unspoken, and the desires that refuse to fade? Let me know in the comments. Also, I want to apologize for any mistakes in pronunciation or in the narration. I'm always working to improve, and your feedback helps a lot. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts. See you in the next story.